Hello.
Okay, so welcome. As I said, while some of you were in the waiting room, this is the fourth global engagement session we've run. It's part of this big effort by Parkour Earth to community source the strategy and really hear from, we'll have everyone who's in the community define the strategy for the organization who wants to be part of representing that community. So these sessions, I'll give a bit more of an intro in a moment, but what I might ask is just in the chat function, in the interest of time, if everyone can just introduce yourselves into the chat button. Let us know, many of you have done this already, but where you're from, but why you're here, yeah, where you're from, why you're here, and anything else you want to let us know in there. And I might hand over to Damien while everyone's introducing themselves there. Damien, I might just hand over to you for a bit of a background as to what we're doing here.
Sure. Yeah, so I just did put in the chat that a little bit about who I am. I'm someone who likes parkour heaps. And yeah, happened to find myself in the position of CEO for Parkour Earth, and also do that for Parkour NZ. This is my wife's arm beside me, just here, Nicole, and she says hello and is joining us as well. But yeah, I stepped into the CEO role for Parkour Earth in August last year. Officially, but we sort of made a bigger song and dance about it in February, and ever since stepping into that role, I've been wrestling with the ideas of, you know, what does an international federation for parkour, what could it look like? I mean, that was the vision of establishing Parkour Earth, with multiple nations working together to create that, was about some sort of platform that everyone could have buy-in and create together from the ground up. And so we really wanted to go back and ensure that we did that well. But then also, what does a contemporary international sport federation look like? Something that's being developed in times now, given all the different critiques and challenges associated with international sport, but also wider societal issues, that we get the opportunity to build something from the ground up now, and take those things into account now. So that's a big driver behind that. And we also want to try and think differently, think outside the box. And yes, we're talking to our national federations and our members, currently our national federations, but does it have to be like that? So we want to go straight to grassroots community and everything in between. And so this is the beginning of our efforts. So we're really excited to have you all attending and sharing today. So thank you for taking the time to do so.
Brilliant, thanks, Damien. So we'll jump straight into it, and thanks everyone for starting to put your intros into the chat. A couple of things about what this session is and how it's going to work. You know, these sessions have been set up very much so to be constructive periods of time. So we're really here to hear from all of you. There will be a chance to ask questions and to hear, sort of have a more, well, no, there'll be a chance to ask questions and get feedback from the Parkour Earth board about anything you're wondering about. But the primary goal of today for us is to get information from you. So I'm just going to jump into the platform we'll be using to capture some of this information. And where we wanted to start off was all of your practitioners from around the world. Why are you here? what did you attracted you to this session, and what are you expecting to get out of it? And I might, for the first chat, throw to someone and ask them to kick us off. Caitlin, do you want to kick us off?
Great. I don't want to be the one who kicks us off, but I'm one of two people from the United States here right now, and I'm joining because I can share a little more information about United States Parkour Association's Knowledge Community Framework, which is a system we are setting up to increase community engagement and encourage open education in our growing national community. Knowledge communities.
Knowledge communities. Yeah. That's cool.
Which was something that was brought up in the session that we just had before. That Hedge and Blake.
Yeah, so I'm happy to do like a quick little overview of how we are structuring that, and then how we're planning to roll it out in the upcoming, in a way that maybe you, Parkour Earth might benefit from, similarly on an international level.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. Who else? Why are you here?
Should I pick the next person?
I'll jump in. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good way to do it, though, Caitlin. Should you pick the next person? Anyway, I'm Ross. I've been following Parkour Earth from the early days, so I'm just kind of continually interested in how it's all coming together, and I'm pretty excited about it because one thing I've been trying to kind of push Parkour Earth towards from the start was doing something like this and getting some community input in terms of finding some direction and being able to start doing stuff in the world rather than just being that vague concept that never really had any concrete value to people. So yeah, I'm excited to see what we come up with and what you guys end up taking away from it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross.
Picking next person. Who commented after me? Oh, Ale from Melbourne. Alessandro.
Hi. Yep. So you can call me Ali. It's usually a bit easier. So I'm here mainly because I'm just really interested in parkour, but also in the community aspect of it. I've only started quite recently, like late last year. So I thought it might be useful for you all to have a perspective of someone who's new to the sport, because I imagine probably quite a few experienced people around here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Wait, am I meant to pick someone?
Yeah, it sounds like that's the rule now, which I'm loving.
Okay. KM?
Kumi.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Kumbi. I'm from South Africa. Been doing parkour for about 8 years now. And I'm really trying to get more into the whole community aspect of parkour, more specifically because it feels like extreme sports are dying in this country, and I want to raise that up, you know. So yeah, I'm really curious as to what we come up with here. I hope I can add value.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Alrighty. Next person, I guess, would be TJ, because that's my nickname too.
I'm here as one of the Parkour Earth board members. We're going to mostly be observing.
Hey TJ, I can't hear you. Your voice is very, very quiet. Is that a problem for everyone, or is that just me?
No, he's quiet. He's going to type it.
It's all right, TJ, your quiet voice brings calm. Kel, if you can speak yet, please go ahead or just type into the chat.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. I'm walking home from work now. I am here because, largely in part because I missed the other one. I'm sorry, Elliot. I'm sorry, everyone.
No worries.
Kel, you're not the only one. I
I'm
missed the
here
last one too.
Hey, there we go. We're dragging the community down from Australia. I'm here because I wanted to see what some of the forms that that leadership and international engagement could take, because I think it's more or less unseen in the local community so far. And to be honest, one of the things that I'm really interested in, just because it's front of mind, is how we can support each other when apocalypses happen. Obviously in Australia, we've had 2 this year. And one of the things that I'm interested in is how leadership can happen under pandemic conditions, more or less. That's kind of just at the front of my mind at the moment. So that's what I thought I'd mention.
Yeah.
Is TJ able to talk yet, or should I pick someone else?
Let's see if this works. Can you hear me now?
That's perfect, TJ.
The automatic setting for some reason always kills my mic. Yeah, so I put in the chat, but I'm one of the Parkour Earth board members. I'm from Australia, and we're all here to observe these sessions so that we can then spread more of them and start facilitating the next round of them, so that we don't have to rely on old mate Elliot to organize all of them and do it in his time zone.
Sweet.
No, brilliant. Adam, did you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, I can. As I mentioned, I'll probably be talking a little bit quieter, just given the hour. But yeah, I'm one of the other folks here representing USPK. I missed the last couple. I was very sad about it. So I'm here to just kind of observe and listen. I had the fortune of having cybersecurity as kind of my day job. So I was able to work remotely from quite a few places, including Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, et cetera. So I've gotten to meet a lot of the wonderful folks, either directly yourselves or folks in your community. So yeah, really just interested to hear kind of more of the global perspective and how we can all kind of contribute to those different voices. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think if I remember, we've got Emma and Nina and left.
Awesome, I'll go now. So I'm Emma from New Zealand, and I think I'm here for more the disability inclusive aspect. I've done parkour both pre-injury and learning how to still kind of instruct and be a part of it now, being a full-time wheelchair user. So
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And Nina.
Hey, so I'm here from a couple of different perspectives. I've kind of been around long enough to see the Scottish and UK scenes grow from there being kind of no formal classes at all to now having quite an established setup for that kind of work, while still maintaining lots of smaller grassroots communities where classes don't feature at all and coaches are seen as something quite separate and distinct. And as part of Parkour Outreach, which is an organisation that Gordon Sang and Danny Anderson founded in Edinburgh, which I'm a director of now, I'm really keen in seeing how we can encourage access to kind of positive physical activity through parkour for people who wouldn't otherwise be involved for whatever reason. And was also really conscious that in the kind of communication around parkour and for this set of engagement, that there was the current directors have a relatively similar background, not necessarily just in terms of demographics, but in terms of their kind of parkour journey and being kind of quite on the more coaching focused, academic, kind of business side of things, which is really important, but was conscious that for Parkour Earth to serve all of parkour's practitioners, that both as a woman, as a queer person, and someone with a foot in a lot of different camps, I didn't know what other representation there might be for people like me, and so I thought I had a bit of a duty to step up. And my day job is part of a big charity where I try and advocate on behalf of kind of underrepresented groups, and there's lots of really, hopefully, positive read across from that into something like Parkour Earth. And I think that the connections between things that don't have an obvious parkour element so far, there's a lot of potential to use expertise from other fields in what Parkour Earth could be, and what parkour could be in general, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Thanks, Nina. And so there was one more, Mitch. Sorry, I didn't see you down in that corner. Mitchell, welcome. Tech problem. No worries, no worries. We'll jump into the next session, but it'd be great if you can tap in what you're expecting into the chat there, and we can get it from there. So I think the first discussion we wanted to start and we wanted to have, and some of your expectations there led into it, but the Parkour Earth came out of this need to respond to FIG. That was sort of the impetus for it to be created, but very quickly became clear that there were other reasons and other benefits that the international organization could step into and could see value in. We wanted to start around, you're all people within the community, some for a long time, some for a shorter time. What is that value, or what is that thing in parkour, or that aspect of parkour that you want to protect? Why is it something that needs an international representative body to be on this footing that we're on? What are you trying to support?
I might jump in if that's all right.
Please.
I tried to gather some feedback from folk in Scotland ahead of this meeting, so there will be kind of points where I'm talking from a personal perspective and points where I'm bringing in stuff from trying to get kind of perspective of the wider community. And there was actually quite a lot of difference in what people wanted from Parkour Earth and what it could be. And there was one kind of grouping that was actually really keen to see something like an international governing body stay as hands off the day-to-day reality of parkour as possible, and kind of just make sure there was space for grassroots practitioners to keep doing their thing without molestation from kind of other fields. So in that way, there was some people who were keen to see it as a sort of a counterbalance to things like FIG, but beyond that, not really interested, didn't understand what value it could provide in a more positive, proactive role. And then on the other side, there are a lot of folk who wanted to see the parkour's, I guess, parkour's access to parkour and the benefits of parkour in terms of engaging with physical activity, engaging with your local environment, engaging with a kind of broad, diverse community, being protected and hopefully encouraged by something like Parkour Earth.
Do you have a feeling for, when you say that word encouraged, what are the sorts of things in your mind?
So there's a few things. I think in different parts of the world and even within countries, everyone will be aware that there are some communities that are more established than others. There's some organizations that are more established than others. And particularly for newer or smaller communities or organizations, an international body that's able to draw on the huge range of existing expertise across the world and kind of funnel that towards people that need support and are looking deliberately for support. And could be one way of doing that. So acting, kind of hooking up mentorships. There's a suggestion from one of the other community members in Scotland about something really simple about performance and coaching opportunities, like a job board, which is kind of real practical and I guess not a super blue sky, but there's nothing like it really so far. And it could be, Parkour Earth's communities and members contributing opportunities for performance or coaching work, or other parkour related jobs that we might not even have invented yet, that folk could see across the world and use that to help make those connections internationally as well, if people were able to travel internationally or locally.
Yeah, cool.
There's maybe a representative thing as well, whereby encouraging in terms of showing, kind of modelling all the different things in practice there is.
Caitlin,
yeah, I was gonna say,
please.
Sure. So on that line of, like, I was looking at her first card of being that you wrote, keeping its hands off, but I'd rather see or have PK Earth or an international governing body be a coordinator of resources. That means like information, people. Like I think about the retreat obviously being that space that has provided something like that in the past. But there are also countries looking to develop programs or pursue projects that other countries have already completed, and acting as a platform for those connections to be made, or facilitator of making those connections. I think like there's expertise that some places have that other places don't, and that giving people access through PKE would be really valuable. And the other is, I'd really like, one thing I do a lot with my organization and hopefully with USPK will be a high-level advocacy around mobility justice and equity in terms of access and recreation. Those are major issues today, especially again in America, about access to sports and equity. And I think that there is a lot of room for leadership in that field, and parkour is really uniquely situated to bring a unique perspective to the conversation, especially in terms of like designing spaces for all mobilities, for providing programs and services that don't have financial or functional barriers. So I'd love to see some thought leadership from PKE.
Yeah,
Resource
that's
creation and
cool.
thought leadership, those are my two. That's what I want to preserve with parkour, is like that sort of quality of experience.
Did I that first card here, was that about right facilitator of resources and connections, or
exactly, yeah.
Awesome.
I really liked what you were saying there, Caitlin, about being a facilitator of resources or coordinator of resources, because I think there's a whole lot of potential there in terms of all across the world, everybody's inventing the wheel independently. And for example, last year with the APA, we were trying to develop a bunch of policies and procedures, and just had the idea to go around through all of our international contacts and other organizations that we knew that might have already done all that work. And on the one hand, it was promising to see how much of it had already been done and how much people could help out. But it was also a bit of an eye-opener of how many people haven't managed to do any of that, and how many people would benefit from having a central contact that they could go to for all of these resources. And that's not just policies and procedures, or it could be like pretty much everything. There's so much knowledge across the parkour world, because essentially people are trying to build an entirely new industry, right? And that takes a lot of different skills. So I think having a coordinated approach to rallying all of that together and having it available for organizations, individuals, professionals, whether that be performers, coaches, anything, for them to be able to access and use, would be really pretty pretty cool.
Yeah, and on that note, another thing I'm thinking about in terms of coordinating knowledge is always around like education and teaching practices. In the United States, we have like 4 or 5 different certifications that you can take to get coaching qualification. And so, you know, the USPK is approaching sort of the pooling, like sort of providing some benefit there by, instead of telling and getting into the weeds about telling people like, or trying to pool consensus on how or what like ways things should be taught, instead talking about like health and safety measures, like this certification to be qualified has to have these minimum standards met. That there's like, people can also retain their autonomy in the pooling of their knowledge. I don't know if that helps at all, but, or contributes at all.
Well, it reminds me of
important. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a bit of a discussion about this in the last session around there's this piece of Parkour Earth perhaps isn't involved in standardizing something like coaching or even competition or whatever, but there is a role in maintaining quality or saying, we're not going to say how to do it, but if you are going to do it, these are some things you need.
And there's lessons, and I believe that there's value in bringing together people, as Ross was even saying, bringing together some of the directors and leads on those education platforms to look where overlaps are and to also benefit. So I think that's another thing is that I do see a lot of like paywalling and information protection. It happens in the United States, but also happens everywhere. People are like free to sharing their IP, but promoting a culture of open education, and that, you know, you when you share an idea, you don't lose an idea. You know, it just gains more strength.
And these boys?
I think there's also the difference between, you know, you're saying there's a lot of different qualifications you could get in the USS, in the US. And that's, you know, that's fine because there's different companies that have different ideas that want to promote different agendas. They've got their autonomy. But there's also the role of being able to provide a bit of a handbook of like, if you want to make a qualification, here's the tools to do it. Here's how everyone else has done it. Here's what they've learned. So it's supporting people to develop their own tools by providing the, you know, the base level building blocks.
Absolutely. And I think that it falls into like the phrase I like to use is, again, open source or open education. I'd love to see PKE adopt an open education stance or an open source education stance. I think it's super powerful and it aligns well with like the origins and the stylings of parkour. Seeing that most people relied on other people freely sharing their knowledge for it to grow. So
and looking at open source, you know, there's always been an idea ticking around of having a parkour wiki that goes, you know, it has all this information on all of your coaching and all of your organizational stuff and all of your training and all of your everything. And if you can coordinate that open sourcing across the world as a Parkour Earth project, that could be an incredible resource for people.
And sorry, one more thing on pooling knowledge. And this is a project that I've been trying to kick off for a while, but maybe it's better housed under an international situation, which is a heritage project. As an architect, so I'm just going to throw that in there, is documentation of sites used for practice, and even potentially the spearheading and support by the international governing body in local bodies pursuing heritage status protection for spots that have cultural value to our community, and viewing our community as having things that are of cultural value to us that are not just parkour parks, but, you know, you see fountains and other sorts of public spaces being deconstructed. There's a really wonderful space there for PKE to step into in terms of leadership and advocacy. And again, going back to being an advocate and that can support localized community.
That's a fascinating
That's a really cool idea.
I would love to see some protection for the Dame de l'Arc lease for the remainder of our years.
Yeah, you should chat with me at some point because I'm trying to start up some heritage protection stuff in the States. So I'd be happy to share and maybe even roll that into PKE instead.
I'm seeing nods from Damien, so I'm sure. Nina, I saw you unmute there.
Yeah, Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask everyone in the group what thoughts there were around supporting communities that basically aren't interested in coaching at all. Because I think the idea of an international framework, or like international kind of, if not absolute standardized, but something where, qualifications can talk to each other and people understand what they mean internationally is really, really positive. But I'm really conscious of some of the kind of biggest, most influential names in parkour and organizations in parkour, like Storer or Motus and stuff, really aren't involved in coaching that much at all. I mean, they might do kind of guest spots, but for people, and there are a lot of new practitioners who might have ambitions to kind of emulate the way they work. And I think that's maybe some of the groups where it's harder, or people don't have an idea yet of what parkour could be for them, or could support that kind of practice. I don't necessarily have heaps of ideas on this one, but I wanted to make sure it was discussed and see what people thought about supporting communities outside the kind of coaching frameworks.
Surely the job board you talked about is a great start to that as well, for either media opportunities or performance opportunities or anything like that.
If I can add some, sorry, Ross, you keep going.
Oh, no, well, I'm just thinking as I'm talking, but yeah, I guess the communities you're talking about, either they're interested in that, trying to become a professional performer or media or whatever, but also just people who just want to jump. And I think that's probably the most important one we need to look at. And what do they think is awesome? I guess jams and big events is a big one that Parkour should be able to move into. Whether that's hosting them or like directly, or just making them possible, as I say, with resources or with potentially funds, or just hype.
Yeah, I was just gonna highlight. So these are all some of the, not all of the notes, but a couple of notes that I picked from other sessions. And when I asked this question of what's worth supporting, the first thing that came out from our last session with businesses was jam culture, and a lot of people saying, it was that culture that allowed people to come together, create a community with strangers and pursue this thing, in collaboration, in this beautiful sort of co-creative experience, and yeah, trying to extend it past that. And interestingly, actually, coaching didn't come up for quite a long time with parkour businesses. So
it would also be interesting in that line of thinking to create resources or tools that support international travel for generalized practitioners. So say like having a directory of contacts. I know this has been attempted before in other ways and probably exists on some level somewhere, but directory of contacts, guides to visiting certain cities. I don't know if this is a project that PK should undertake, but it's a potential way to provide a service in terms of like, I think about travel advisories, the card project by David Banks. But the idea of helping people educate themselves when they travel, because travel is such an integral element of our practice, that there's definitely a need there for, especially as the younger new generation comes up through learning. And in today's climate, don't come to America.
Just to build a little bit what.
Because last year I was doing a fair bit of like international based stuff with the APA. And technically I'm supposed to be doing that now as well, but other stuff. I wrote up like almost like a plan for projects that I wanted to hit in that, and I think you've brought up a lot of them already, Caitlin. So I wonder if I might link that to Elliot or Damien to have a look at and see if that's, because it seems like it might be relevant to the discussion.
Yeah,
in terms of like idea spitballing.
Yeah. Adam, you just started a second ago.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to build a little bit off of what Caitlin was kind of saying. we've had discussions within USPK about making sure that while we're looking at things like, you know, different committees for things like competition and kind of standardization, that we're also trying to create another committee that sometimes may act as a counterweight, as more of kind of like a culture-driven committee that is almost like not by nature anti-competitive, but kind of keeps that ethos there. And true to form, basically, to kind of act as that counterbalance. I think that's extremely important. That touches on kind of the jam community as well. And I think the other point that's a little bit separate is, you know, being able to build a parkour economy. Nina brought up, you know, Modus and Store, and they're obviously like extremely smart lads, and have like figured out a way to kind of generate, you know, revenue for themselves, followers, all these different things, kind of outside of the normal like coaching and gym running sort of thing. And I think involving folks like that from the early get-go and showing that buy-in is, you know, important, and that they have a voice here as well is, you know, not only beneficial to us as like a more of an international group, but also, you know, attracts more people to the org to kind of see what's going on. And it just basically setting the framework up to create a parkour economy that is very full. It's not just the coaching, it's not just stunt performing, there's a whole range of opportunities. And you know, even getting to the point where we partner with orgs like that are able to say, hey, here's how we did it. You know, we were just kids that started filming and had a YouTube channel, and it's progressed to here and here and here, and this is what we've learned along the way. I think that'll be really important going forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. What a lot of these, so everything we've sort of talked about here is, in my mind, you know, these are all the actions, the what of Parkour Earth. I guess the last question I just wanted to ask in this part of the discussion is the why is it necessary, or why do you as national practitioners or local practitioners feel the need for international representation, if you feel that need? I mean, Caitlin and Adam, you guys have some great examples from the US. You know, what is the value add of having it at an international level? Why should we do this at all?
So for me, it's not so much representation, but as I said earlier, connection. And I think having an international facilitator who brings together, like, all of us have the same problems in slightly different clothes. And we have same goals and shared values. And I think that having an organization that can take leadership on coordinating solutions. And again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but to also be like a major like international advocate, like that is an organization in which I want to lend my skills and abilities to, and my weight to, a group of people who are also going to help promote, like I said, subjects of justice and equity through movement. But that's the value to me, is having a centralized voice and a space of resource coordination. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here in the States. You know, we have 50 states, and most communities are incredibly isolated. You can kind of like little micro countries unto themselves in some ways, all with different concerns, problems in some ways, but at the same time, all those problems are the same. Through collaboration, it makes the processes of like growing community much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, great.
I think just providing that voice of diversity is extremely important. We obviously like have been doing our best to do that in the US, and that is a challenge in a place like the US, but you know, giving it our best go. But I think in particular, it's just, yeah, depending on where you go in the world, you know, the cultures are very different. And I think being able to kind of fairly represent that is not an easy undertaking. So I applaud you guys for attempting that. But I think it's something that needs to be done, both in terms of protection, which is kind of what you brought up at the beginning of why Parkour Earth was kind of initially created. And then, yeah, the diversity part of it is just kind of like, you know, people train differently in different places. I feel like the US has been very like gym centric in a lot of its history. But if you go to places like I've trained for quite a while in Rio de Janeiro, and that was like, you know, in Brazil, and that was totally different. Like everyone learns how to do flips at the beach, and that's it, you know. And you train in certain places because if you have run-ins with the police, they will just shoot on sight. So, you know, it's very different depending on where you go, and each community has their own different struggles and voices to lend to that. And so, yeah, just kind of what Caitlin said, it's a great platform to put all of those forwards and basically say, you know, we've had troubles here, here's how we dealt with it. You just come up to a lot more, you end up with a lot more solutions while raising other problems as well. So.
Yeah, great. Cool. I might then shift us down to the next section of this board, and just before I do that, though, just to give you a quick overview of some of the things that have come up in some of the other discussions. When we had our first session with the federations, some were federations from Parkour Earth, some were just general national federations around the world, and we spoke about some of the issues with where Parkour Earth is at the moment around, you know, still some skepticism because of, you know, a lack of clarity around what Parkour Earth is doing. But then really talking about as well, you know, in the future, it is sort of that voice across those federations that are members, creating strong organizations to defend the community. The connection piece had come up as well. Connection within the community, and then also communication outside of the community to the outside world as well. In the second session, which brought together a group of people we'd loosely called influencers, but essentially were just people, highly connected folks who we felt were able to speak or bring the opinions of many different types of people and many different people that they're involved with. We had a long conversation about FIG and the Olympics and whether that's actually still important, and how, you know, there's bits of it that are important, but of course it's not the be all and end all. You know, that Parkour Earth should try and stay relatively high level, not get involved in super local pieces. But that doesn't exclude us from doing that knowledge sharing aspect that you all mentioned as well. And as well standard setting or quality assurance. And then in the last session, I mentioned jam culture, but we also spoke about a library of knowledge, concept, and recognition of quality. So those are some of the other things that came up. There's a lot of other content that we'll be going through, but some highlights. So I wanted to jump down to then.
Sorry, Elliot.
Sorry, Damien. Yeah.
I just, while it was on my mind, I just thought I would quickly share a story that relates to a couple of the concepts around travel and movement around the space and supporting people and advocacy, potentially, just of a story that's happening currently in New Zealand that we're going through, where we have funding for a project to be doing some delivery in schools in the town that I live in, which we've done before, and it's been scaled up. And now our current coaches have to pull back. And so and at the same time, we had some schools say, oh, it'd be awesome if we had, do you have a female coach available? And we currently have an Austrian coach who is very keen and very capable and very skilled and has regular connections here in New Zealand and is currently in New Zealand. And she came to us before this had, well, basically came to us at the exact same time saying, hey, I'm wondering about trying to find a way to secure a visa to stay in New Zealand because I really want to support the community here. This happened at the same time. And so we've been going through supporting her visa application through Parkour NZ. And we just found out on Wednesday that it was declined, and we're going through now the process of essentially an appeal sort of reapplication process. But it was quite clear that the immigration process had very little understanding of parkour as an activity and what its culture and the way it's developed and how the connections are built and how that information, how they can access that information to, I guess, verify the accuracy and the authenticity of her application. And so it's sort of a talent visa to do with her things to do with international recognition, quality within the space of parkour, and the opportunity to bring influence to parkour in New Zealand. And so we as Parkour NZ thought we did a very clear job of articulating why the most experienced and capable female practitioner and coach to be in New Zealand and ever visit New Zealand. And yet they came back and said, we can't see any way that she would have any influence on parkour in New Zealand. And that was a big slap in the face to both us and certainly to her. And so we're now working through the process of collecting additional information to support this reapplication. But in terms of trying to support these connections and also this high level advocacy of helping, you know, even governments and groups to understand what is this practice, what does it mean, how do these things work. I just thought I might add that, chuck that on the record as an example of challenges that that we're facing here in New Zealand around these international connections and our immigration process, understanding how we can support coaches and support travel and visa applications and the like.
Yeah, movement is a human right.
Yeah, I know Kel had a similar experience trying to stay in Scotland, again, where the case decided that it wasn't strong enough, despite the number of qualified female coaches even in the UK at that time being super low. I was wondering about Parkour Earth's ability internationally to advocate on behalf of non-members specifically. I was looking like sorry, trying to organise my thoughts a bit before I started speaking. Parkour UK is the national governing body here. Oh, sorry, apparently you're really quiet. Is that any better? Let me do this. Yeah, cool. So Parkour UK is the national governing body here, and there's been all sorts of like boring local politics, which hopefully we've turned a corner on. But one of the things that Parkour Earth could do is act as like check and balance for national governing bodies as well, where there's a understanding of everyone working to the same ends, as long as there's trust between the bodies. And if trust breaks down either way, that local or subnational kind of communities know that they can call on Parkour Earth to say, hey, we need some help. You know, we think that we're excluded from this, or we think that our national governing body is doing X, Y, Z, and ways of kind of like almost arbitration, I think could be really useful. Because I've kind of got a bad habit of preparing for the worst, not necessarily assuming the worst, but often we don't want to think about, you know, what things go really badly wrong, what if relationships break down. But actually, if you have those processes in place beforehand, it's way easier to address than waiting until the relationships break down before you try and get a process of relationship breakdown. So that was one thing that I would hope could be really useful in kind of worst case scenarios, and even just to provide guidance to new governing bodies, things like that. And then the other kind of comparison I want to draw is with in the UK particularly, and I suspect it's probably true in quite a lot of Europe, there are really different access cultures to public space and rural space than there are in the States, for sure. And there are existing bodies like in Scotland. Mountaineering Scotland is a members organisation that advocates on behalf of people who are hill walkers, rock climbers, skiers and snowboarders, and their membership would not contain most casual walkers. So like, I am not a member of Mountaineering Scotland, but I see the work they do in terms of maintaining paths on the hills, advocating for maintaining right of way and right of access to the hills, and ensuring that there is support for things like mountain rescue or educational, like young people's activities. And all of those are things that I benefit from directly as someone who is a casual walker, a casual climber. And there's things Parkour Earth could do, like, you know, starting with the work that David Banks has done with ourselves at Parkour Outreach on the law and the legal access, and working really hard at national government level, throwing their weight behind improving access to public space, whether it's urban or rural. And I think that could be a really, really cool thing and a really specific thing to advocate on the Parkour community.
Yeah, that's great. Can I ask, because I think the first point you pulled up is a really interesting and complex one. This idea of a check and balance between national governing bodies. And I know one of the questions that has come up is around who does Parkour Earth represent? And, traditionally, an international sporting body represents its member federations, which, in the UK would be Parkour UK, or Australia, would be the APA. But this question came up of just because they do it that way doesn't mean Parkour Earth has to, and what is the role of non-members, or how are the rights of paid up federation members balanced against the broader community interests, especially because the federations are usually made up of certain parts of the community, and often there are other parts of the community that are not interested or not able to engage in that sort of platform. I'm curious just to know what people's thoughts are on that representative side.
We've had some lengthy discussions about this with USPK, as far as what do you charge for when it comes to members, or what do you make freely available? And I think that the kind of answer we keep coming back to is basically, if you are seen as kind of a central resource provider, you obviously provide as many of those resources for especially underdeveloped communities as freely as you possibly can. And the idea is that we're still growing the sport in completely brand new ways, and we're still collecting a lot of data. And I think that's the thing, is that as we kind of grow, this data will actually become more valuable. So we look at something like injury reports. In the US, that's a very serious thing because it's a very litigious country, for better or worse. So insurance is, like a must. And so it's one of those things where if we're providing a lot of resources and different things for being able to document incidents or injuries or anything like that, basically that data, you're able to do stuff with that. And that's something that we're considering, all right, maybe access to that data should be something for members only, versus, if you want to set up a constitution in your own country and kind of start a parkour federation or something like that, that should be a more freely available tool, versus some of that data can actually be used to, aggregate for things like insurance. It's much easier to get insurance taken care of if you've got a whole bunch of stats on what parkour injuries look like, how long they are, etc. So
partnerships doesn't have to be insurance, could be partnerships.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Partnerships. Yeah.
Which might be more relevant for secondary. I'm gonna hop on with Cozy there too and say more on the side of who are we representing. And I think that this is a conversation we bring to a lot of the organizations I'm a part of, is who's not sitting at this table right now and why. Why did the people who are here get invites, and why are the people not here not getting invites? And do we even know who those people are? And there are, I think this is actually a great time to bring up IPF and the fact that whether or not fabricated, targeted, whatever happens to be in terms of the community they've pursued as their member federations, they have provided at least some of those communities support and resources in their development of their communities, which we need to acknowledge. And I don't see that level of, and then again, resource constraints, but there are communities out there that don't necessarily have the tools to reach us, that we need to go and reach them where they are. If we expect people who really need help or support to access our tools on our time through our platforms, we will always be a space of privilege. And so I think that is a really important and valuable question to ask as an international governing body, is if you really want to be representative and supporting the growth of parkour across the globe, there does have to be, in the line of advocacy, also effective and aggressive outreach. Obviously, that means dealing with languages, cultures, societies that aren't in alignment with white Western world, which a lot of us are from, I think. And so I think that that is another major open question of, you know, I see a lot of non-representation here, and I see a lot of white representation here, but like I'm always thinking about who's not here and why.
And I think there is a huge barrier if the way to be represented in Parkour Earth is to talk through your member organization. There's obviously a huge barrier to making an effective national organization, which is an exclusion for people. Like, I know Germany tried for a bit to get something together, but there's all kinds of reasons that can't happen for them. For a country that's as established in terms of their parkour community as Germany, if they can't be here for that reason, then there's a big problem there. So I wonder if there should be some kind of system for people outside, or for people to engage with Parkour Earth and have representation outside of going through their national member organization. Whether that's, I don't know if there's maybe a system to create like a community ambassadorship that people could have as a, I don't know if that's a title that people would want to have, so that there's a recurring contact between different communities, different advocacies and Parkour Earth, and whether there's regular forums for them to get together and state concerns or bring up ideas.
Yeah, I think there's probably a structure. And again, I'm thinking about our knowledge communities. And that was my first thought. I was like, oh, have an outreach or community development knowledge community. Knowledge communities are basically designed around, or groups with either a shared project or interest or identity. And so a project can be that they undertake doing this sort of extensive outreach, trying to, you know, put in volunteer hours every week to reach populations that aren't reaching us. I think I also want to just add to all of this is that I recognize we've listed a lot of things that PK Earth could do and maybe should do, and it's a limited resource operation, but that's why designing a mechanism for people to interface with the organization and contribute outside of their own governing body membership. Like if I wasn't a part of USPK, like what is the mechanism for me to contribute my skills and abilities to Parkour Earth? It's not so clear to me. Maybe it's clear, and there are paths, and I'm sure there are, but it just was never, if it's not easy to find, that's a barrier. You know, if there's lots of processes and applications and things only in English, and I know they're not, there are a lot of barriers to participation. So I'll
say it is pretty cool to see that Parkour Earth has been, well, I mean, this is outreach in a way as well, right? And that they have been trying to reach out to other potential members or something like that. I know that Damien's done a fair bit of chatting to me recently about the Japanese community. And sorry, I haven't forgotten about those questions, Damien. I'll get them translated and back to you. But yeah, I know they've had a lot of struggles with getting together a national organization. But yeah, there's definitely people that have, you know, things they would want Parkour Earth to do, or there's definitely people who have experience and voices to lend. So there definitely needs to be a system or a pathway outside of just, you know, reaching out. And at the moment, all we can really say is, hey, get yourselves together and make a national organization. But
yeah, it's not always possible.
Yeah, it's not always possible.
I mean,
I know one of the ones the APA faces is, to be a full member, you have to be the national governing body of parkour in your country, right? But we can't do that in Australia because sport is defined as competitive, and we're not entirely on board with that as our identity. So that's been a barrier for us, and there's all kinds of other things that could be a barrier.
Damien, you were going to jump in before. Did you still want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I thought Caitlin raises a really great point, and something that I've been it's scary. Something that Yeah, the current Parkour Earth constitution in terms of board level opportunities and engagement is that someone needs to be in the board of a member federation in order to be essentially apply or be someone who can sit on the board at Parkour Earth. And is that the way it should be? I mean, there might be good reasons for that, but is that the only way that it has to be? And a lot of the formation and initial documentation and stuff that underpins Parkour Earth presently was all set up in a way that mimics international federations, again, because of that interest in protection and trying to be on the same kind of level playing field as the rest of the international sporting landscape and community. And I think there's aspects of that maybe can and should or have value in terms of modeling. But again, if we're building something that entirely new, we get to decide. There are, when we built Parkour NZ, we, all of basically every single sporting organization that we know of collects money, or it really applies for money from gambling proceeds. So through New Zealand's pokie machine, slot machine companies that own those things, there's a huge flow through of that money going into charitable aims. And so there is an argument for, well, you can use that money to do great things in these communities, but we had people within our community, not necessarily through gambling, but from other areas of addiction, that said, actually, Parkour's been a real saving grace for us, and it's actually brought us out of some of those troubling spaces. We really struggle with this idea of collecting money from this space and using it in this space. So we don't want Parkour NZ to do that. So we haven't. And now we've gone through COVID, and all these sporting organizations are like, oh no, all the pokie machine money is drying up. We can't access all this stuff because no one's been out in the pubs and doing all this stuff. And we haven't had to access any money from the government through that process because we never had that money in the first place. So that's something that Parkour NZ has done that's very different from the rest of New Zealand's sporting landscape. And what can Parkour Earth do in the same respect on an international scale?
I like it. You didn't have to lose all the money because you never had the money.
I just wanted, we don't have to linger on this, but I do want to point out that I think it is incredibly problematic that if directors of PKE have to sit on boards of national governing bodies, there's a whole number of reasons, but like one of the top ones is that like discrimination against populations is structural and institutional, and especially in leadership capacities. And there are reasons like you don't see like women, people of color, different genders at leaderships in equal amounts because discrimination is structural. And so that I am sitting on USPK board, it feels anomalous sometimes, especially inside the parkour community, which is still very much dominated by male culture. So there are some amazing female voices out there, people of color, individuals with disabilities. I really strongly urge you to reevaluate that practice or that policy, because it is incredibly exclusive and discriminatory. But that's just my opinion.
Totally get it. Under the current, and this is a key point of all of this work, is that's what is there, but how could it be different? Because we think it should be different. And I'm assuming it was Cal, but I laughed and I really liked the video description of the Melbourne in Motion sharing of the Parkour Earth call to action video of white men in their 30s. I can't remember word for word, but I thought that was great because yeah.
And I'm not saying that you answer. I just want to make sure the conversation's happening, because just saying that's how other places do it is not acceptable from like international leadership. And I know you're really well educated, and it's not acceptable as a reason. So something
Damien raised in one of the previous calls that I wanted to bring up was, exactly that point, Caitlin, around, it was set up for a specific purpose in response to something, which was around FIG, and there were drivers to that. But now that there's been some space to really reflect on that and look at, you know, how quickly it was stood up, and there was a lot of thinking that went into the constitution, but it was really around how do we get this right from a disciplined representative perspective, from the practice in contrast to FIG. And Damien mentioned on, I think it was the second call, that every year when there is an AGM for Parkour Earth is an opportunity to change those rules and to change that constitution. And that becomes an opportunity in November, I think. So part of this process of global engagement is raising what are those questions that we need to resolve and we need to look at and interrogate for ahead of the AGM.
Yeah, and I'm just pointing out that there's always opportunity, but there actually needs someone who's going to champion those changes. Otherwise, it'll just be year after year with an opportunity that will never have any action on it. So as a priority, because like this is something like I would love to be higher involved in Parkour Earth, but also having double board service or triple board service at that point is just not viable for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
There
like
was
saying also personal perspective.
There was a really good point that got raised in one of the previous discussions that touched on this nicely, but I don't know if I've kept it on the board somewhere. But we had a large discussion last session around a lot of the work that John Hedge Hall has been doing and Access Parkour and is that, oh, I don't know where those birds are from. Are they me? No. And I'm not sure where I was going with that. Anyway, it was a big discussion and we'll revisit it at some point because it's on this mural board somewhere. I might just shift us to this next discussion, and it sort of flows from that, and I think we've got some of the pieces in there already, but we had this discussion when we were setting the intent for these sessions around Parkour has this really deep, unique philosophy or set of understandings about why practice is the way it is at a philosophical level. And there's this feeling in the Parkour Earth board that some of those also translate or could be translated into organizational principles, how the organization runs. And, you know, we've talked a lot about access, and I can see immediately there's this tie between, you know, we talk about access to space, access to the community, as well as access to having a say within the board or having a say within the organization. There's a nice philosophical tie there. But I wanted to explore with you, you know, what other principles of Parkour would you like to see reflected in how the organization runs? And Nina very politely put up your hand. You put up your hand in the chat.
Hey, it was actually just before we shifted to something altogether differently. This might be useful for this conversation as well. But
yep.
I just wanted to,
Nina, can you hold the?
Still, yeah, that better. Yes. Okay, cool. On representation and underrepresentation or non-representation, I think it's worth Parkour Earth looking outside of sports bodies for best practice. International and professional sports is like notoriously corrupt and discriminatory. And I think there's a lot of good practice you could get from other kinds of non-profits. Not necessarily like huge NGOs, which have their own issues. But for example, in UK, like charity best practice for board makeup is to have 50% external trustees. So that doesn't necessarily mean people who don't do parkour, but that certainly means people outside of other federation structures, for example. And that's just seen as absolutely the kind of default to ensure that you don't end up with kind of internally corrupt board structures where everyone's kind of speaking just themselves and has no vision of external factors. And then linked to that, I think it's worth noting that the folk who would be most embedded and most identifying with the communities that aren't represented, like in this group right now or in the kind of other engagement you've managed so far, they're likely to be the least experienced in this kind of formalized kind of representation in international discussions. And so some of what you have to do, and it's why it doesn't happen very often because it's fucking hard and it actually takes some effort and resource, is if you want to encourage input from people who aren't in the room, you have to find space to support them to express themselves, to gather feedback from their wider community, to introduce types of like training and mentorship if required, so that folk are empowered and able to engage perhaps the first time with these formalized structures. I'm really conscious that even if we're talking about middle class teenage white boys, that a lot of them will never have thought about trying to engage in like a formal representative structure before. They'll see parkour as quite sort of anti that and something, you know, it's cool and alternative. And so what you can do though is potentially use Parkour Earth to not only reach out and engage to underrepresented groups, but use Parkour Earth as a tool of providing experience and training in those other skills that are not exclusive to parkour that they can then use in their own life and in their own communities. And it's something that's done quite a lot in trying to do grassroots engagement in Scotland, certainly in the UK, where there's a lot of the kind of like jargon word is lived experience, which just basically means usually poor people or black people or disabled people. But the idea is that you don't talk to academic experts, you talk to people for whom the issues are really real and present in their everyday life. And that usually requires significant resources. And I think it would be interesting that if Parkour does find itself with access to more like financial resources and time resources and dedicated volunteers, that they commit to dedicating some of that to training, promoting new skills in the grassroots parkour community where possible. And that can be through national federations where appropriate sometimes. But yeah, like learning from non-sports groups is definitely something I'd recommend. And even within sports, looking at sports that exist outside club structures, so things like skateboarding and BMXing, a lot of them have national governing bodies, but they don't have like a clubhouse or an athletics hall or whatever. And you might find more easily translatable principles for the kind of work that Parkour seems to want to do. With the next bit now, sorry.
No, that's great. And it reminded me what I was going to mention before, and it was this discussion we had around, around that issue of actually a lot of those groups that we want to engage or that aren't able to engage in this format. The onus should be on us to be reaching out and creating those spaces. And I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but one of the intents of this round was, Damien said to me before we did the first session, there's all these groups we know that aren't represented in these forums, and we know they're not represented, but also we don't know, we know there's some that are easier to engage just through direct contact, but there's all these others that are not. And how do you create a digital engagement for communities that are not digitally engaged, or it's not a big part of how they work? I'm doing another project at the moment, which is looking at sexual health services for people with disabilities in Sierra Leone and Senegal. And in that, we're bringing in a lot of technical expertise to just be able to have the conversation with people experiencing different types of disabilities. So I wanted to use that as an opportunity to put a call out to any of you as well. If you do have experience in how to engage in a more inclusive way for certain communities, I think that's certainly something I would expect the board would be super interested in trying to not guess at how to do it, but to take in the experience that we already have. I saw Kel and Nina unmute. I wanted to hand, maybe over to you, Kel, if you wanted to go still.
Just something that occurred to me, and it was attached to something at the time, but now it seems like free floating. But something that
I'm struggling to hear you, Cal.
Oh no. All right, Nina, you go. I'll see if I can find my mic.
That's slightly better, even just being closer.
Okay, sweet.
Just yell.
Just yelling. Yeah, yelling's always the answer. One thing that I've found somewhat problematic with the APA, and I suppose this connects to your earlier question, Elliot, about the values of parkour being turned into organizational values, but it's worth making special effort to consider
Indigenous custodians of the lands on which we move, because I don't, in Australia, I don't think there's ever been a concerted effort to do that. I know in Melbourne we haven't had any outreach programs with Indigenous folk, so just adding a special category to engaging people of colour, we do have to consider engaging Indigenous peoples, largely because we are very much connected to place, I suppose. That seemed relevant earlier. I've said it now.
No, that's great. Thanks, Cal.
I actually sent something to Caitlin before I remembered she wasn't really on Facebook the other week about any connections between the Indigenous communities in the States and parkour practice, because there's some, again, looking outside parkour, there's already some really cool organisations, American Indigenous health, well-being and kind of physical activity organisations who are talking about like, I think one is called Well for Culture is one of the ones I've come across. And it's basically about the idea of, connection to land, using your environment to stay fit and healthy, avoiding reconnecting with food as well, particularly because of the nature of colonisation and the awful shit meted out on Indigenous communities. There's a lot of health inequalities. And so, without assuming that parkour is welcome in those communities, I think that we do have shared interests around land, creativity in land, and avoiding more formalised physical activity kind of structures, I guess. But obviously Scotland mostly went out and did the colonising, and our own Indigenous cultures is not under the same sort of oppression.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to boost everyone. We have less staff than I thought we did, so
No worries.
Jump back out into the world. But cheers for that.
Thanks, Ross. If you have anything else, please feel free to email it through.
Yeah, we'll do.
So I think there's a huge discussion in there around access and inclusiveness and how do we make sure that's across practice but also representation as well as contribution. And I think the point around Indigenous peoples as well. There's another one in here around I don't know what the right word is, but it's connection that's not necessarily within the community, but shared interest. Or values or something in there.
Solidarity, like a good concept.
Yeah. Beyond that, in terms of principles of parkour, are there other things that translate across and to sort of prompt that? We spoke a little bit about in the very first session around an issue of transparency in sporting federations quite broadly, but also, whether it's between organizations at a national and international level, whether it's between communities or businesses. And that was something that came out in the first session that sort of, it touches into that open space or open source discussion we had before. We've also, I know at the board level, had huge discussions. There were huge discussions about standardization of practice and the respect of non-standardized practice, that there is diversity within how parkour is practiced and that should be respected. Parkourists shouldn't become a protector of a particular type of practice. But I wanted to, reach out more on what other things sort of cross over there, or what other things should the board be using in terms of the values or principles in the way that it pursues its work.
I have a quick thought, which again might be slightly tangential to the question. Oh, sorry, yelling. And I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is when you ask about values is longevity and sustainability, and as founding principals, Parkour, blah blah blah. And what I know is that everyone here is tired. And when people are working in leadership in grassroots levels, and I know PK people aren't getting paid, or you're not getting paid enough. So it is always worth questioning if you have strategies around sustainability, avoiding burnout, and passing on knowledge about that to people further downstream. Not that I expect you to have the answers regarding ever getting enough sleep, but it's just something I'd like to flag. And with that, also thank you all for the work that you do. I know that you don't get, everyone working doesn't get the time and the resources that they should. And if we can build organizational structures that avoid burnout, then maybe that'd be good, blah.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I mean, there's so much in there as well. Obviously, from my own experience with the APA and with the other former or current APA members there, things like leadership succession are really hard, really, really hard. And especially when, Mitchell, I'm sure you, as a current VP of APA, figuring out when am I going to finish my term and who's going to take over that and who's going to be crazy enough to take that on is really tough, really, really tough. And as well, I think there's an aspect in there that comes around longevity and sustainability of the voices that we're gathering during outreach, and sort of as that passes through the chain of organization, how does that keep influencing or keep being part of as it gets abstracted up into strategy. The chat section's going off. Sorry, I'm trying to read and speak at the same time.
All right.
Yeah, please, Mitch.
I hope I'm loud enough for everyone, or not too loud.
Mate, your microphone is gigantic, so don't you worry.
I think the biggest thing with leadership transition, and this definitely filters in with sort of the sustainability of those leadership structures over time, which I feel like is where Kel's point was sort of as well, is like the structures in place. For example, in Perth Parkour, which is basically my smallest community structure that I'm associated with, we've had a lot of success in basically we've tried to look at the structure of the association with the intention of, if XYZ individuals stepped away today, could classes continue to run, and could we continue to facilitate the intentions of the association? And that has basically been a pillar, essentially, of what we've been trying to focus on for a year, maybe two. So we've done all the big formal things that we could do in terms of like getting a constitution together, getting a booking platform together, and just making them as I guess in a way as user friendly as possible. So essentially I can take the keys to the sign in or the login details and say, cool VP, here it is next year, and just say, you do it like this, and everything else is automated. To an extent, I think I call them like legacy issues. Fixing legacy issues like that, or ensuring that there's a way that the PK board member can step away and just hand one or two pieces of paper over to the next person, is one way of just making sure that leadership doesn't tire out so fast. I think a big thing with associations like this is, as you were saying, Elliot, when one person steps away, there's a little bit of maybe a vacuum, because all of a sudden you might not have like a very clean handover process, and you have to pick up all these pieces from where you picked up, or where it's been left off. Lots of projects not necessarily finished, or like they might have great intentions, and they might have had resources before on a previous committee, but you're just not really sure where to go. And I think, at least in my experience in the last almost 10 months transitioning into the APA, we probably spent, I don't know, maybe a month, 2, maybe even 3, just trying to pick up the pieces, or just trying to figure out a direction of where we were going. And I guess that this also connects with having, like, how would I say, a consistent vision across different committees to an extent, which is very, very difficult to do. And I don't think I probably couldn't comment on that here, but in terms of going back to where I started, because I've gone on a bit of a tangent, the legacy issues, and if you can have those nice structures in place, I think is a very good starting point for something as big as PK Earth. And because if you have those structures in place, you're not having to redo them or refocus on them, or spend that 2 months at the beginning of your term just to get that vision back together. I think that would make a very effective, but also a very focused PK Earth going forward.
I'm going to hop in and also contribute here. So I have worked with organizational change management consultants. I took over a nonprofit 3 years ago, and I just handed off a nonprofit 2 weeks ago. So I've gotten to be on both ends of leadership transitions, and also having worked fairly high level with a consultancy. I will just add that I don't think there is any way in which any organization, no matter how well organized, can be so fully prepared that they can hand off 2 pieces of paper. I know that was an exaggeration, but even, you know, for especially large organizations with such like potentially operational range, you should always be planning for a 2 to 6 month transition period, because there is so much legacy knowledge that just exists inside someone's head sometimes. And while we can get better at creating systems to record and capture and translate that, obviously, it's not always possible. Even like some processes day to day, it's like, if I had to document every single process that I did so I could just hand it off, that would burn me out. It's easier for me to know, and like, and again, my organization, when I came in, like I was like, we're planning for when I'm leaving, and I don't know when that's going to be. We're planning for it, and we're going to know what that's going to look like. I'm going to know roughly how long it's going to take. We have a planned 3-month transition right now. We're a tiny organization. You know, we primarily operate in Seattle region. And we have 3 months of transition activity where there's still pay going to me and I'm still providing support capacity. So just to put a realistic perspective on that, like to anyone running an organization, there will naturally be mission shift, operation changes, financial removing, like moving around when a new leader comes on. And I think organizations that can accept that as a part of the process and plan for it will be more effective. You don't want a leader to leave. Like if my last day of work is tomorrow, I don't want them gone tomorrow. That's such a loss of institutional knowledge. You know, so when Damien eventually leaves the board, I don't want him out of the picture tomorrow. I want him involved in some advisory capacity for the next 6 months to a year. Obviously not in like, you need to be free, but also it's
Thanks, Kevin.
it's not unrealistic to have that expectation. Just like to put in perspective of course, but as long as PK Earth has a clear plan of action on how transition happens, and it's communicated to the community, that was the only thing that like and maybe I just missed it again because it's all done on social media. When the transitions around PKE happened, it felt very sudden. I was like, oh, all right, cool. Like, that's what PK Earth is doing. So I believe in over communication during transition periods. Yeah, sorry, David.
Once you're in, you're never out. This is like Davy Jones' locker of leadership. No, but you're, yeah, 100%. I actually have worked as a change management consultant, and it's a bloody messy space. And, you know, even coming from that industry, when I handed over the APA, actually to TJ, who's also in here, I know it was incredibly messy and there's so much stuff. And the last thing you want is just read this. Bye.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's a really good point, and I guess it's similar to the putting in place provisions for relationship breakdown. Oh, sorry.
Hold your microphone, Nina.
It's similar to putting in place provisions for a relationship breakdown. From day one, you should be thinking about resilience of the wider organisation. And yeah, like the kind of phrase in our team, like stuff has been super busy at my day job recently, which means that the usual kinds of note taking, sharing of information hasn't happened. But what we come back to kind of once a week is, right, what if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? What on earth is going to happen with all the stuff that I'm carrying around in my head at the moment that still needs to be progressed? And so there's a thing about resilience of the wider organisation, which that's really important too. And thinking about leadership as distributed rather than concentrated. Some of the best kind of leaders and managers I work with are people who have almost made themselves redundant by virtue of sharing responsibilities where appropriate, supporting people to take on more responsibility, and understanding that there's going to be backward. Like you can take a holiday. Like at the moment, if I don't know if anyone from the PK Earth board could realistically take a holiday and know that their work would be covered as opposed to just paused. Like that's really, really important around burnout. So tying in with Kel's point about longevity, I think that's a really vital one. So yeah, starting and making sure the transition plans. And then one of the other things in terms of Parkour principles that could be translated into operational principles is around like it's being strong to be useful again, advocating on behalf of underrepresented communities, which we've already talked about, but also parkour's usefulness, like as itself, to people who are not currently practitioners, its ability to grab headlines, cameras, to promote certain causes or to align with certain causes, all that kind of stuff. We want to think about parkour, doing parkour, being strong in parkour as not just an end in itself. I'd be really, really excited if a national body could talk about the way parkour has a role to play in some of the bigger questions we've got. I think I put this on the survey anyway, so apologies for repeating myself, David.
No, that's great. And if it's all right, I might even elevate that point just sort of on this same level of, a high level parkour concept that really applies so much more broadly. And we've spoken about it in a different format previously where it goes beyond the practice, it goes beyond the win as well. If you're talking about in a performance environment, skills beyond the practice or beyond the immediate in front of you is a really interesting principle. I want to just shift the discussion for the last sort of 20 minutes, the last bit of time that we have, through to, we've touched on this a bit in underrepresented communities, but Parkour Earth is an international or vying to be an internationally representative body, which means we're talking many cultures, many languages, many different platforms of engagement, a whole lot of complexity in how we engage. And if we want to be a grassroots community, then engaging is a default. It's got to be something that happens. But how would you want to engage? How would the different people that we've been talking about a lot, how do we reach them in a meaningful way? Facebook groups are limited, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Chris Grant's comments, I know he's like on the kind of public thread. Obviously know Chris from Glasgow, and the work that we do in our day jobs overlaps in the extent. And what you said already about kind of self-facilitated sessions all over the world is something that could be really useful. Finding willing, because folk like ourselves, we'll all know people who are less likely to get involved in events like this and processes like this, but they're actually the people who are most to capture. So I think there's a responsibility on anyone participating now to see if they can spread that participation more widely with appropriate support kind of tools, frameworks from Parkour Earth as to the kind of information they want to gather and the kind of questions they want to ask But yeah, I think it's on all of us a little bit to help push that to our own networks and further afield, and then as much as possible empower folk to take responsibility for it themselves in a way they wouldn't expect to otherwise. And I'm also conscious, even in this conversation, that there's a couple of loudmouths like me and Caitlin who are taken up all the time, and sometimes you need to explicitly say to folk who are quieter, not necessarily in this conversation, people have their own reasons, but you might need to say, no, you actually, like, I don't want to hear from this group who've got all their stuff. Be really explicit, like, if you fit these categories, if you're interested in these things, we want to hear from you because we've heard from all these other people and their stuff already.
I have two recommendations, I'm sorry, I think I partially missed the question, but I have two recommendations on increasing the ability to reach reach other populations and increase access. The first is, and I see someone mentioned, they're going to do facilitated sessions in French or Spanish. That's great. It would be awesome if even in this session, like getting some of that translated or translated live. There's, you know, obviously that's work. Someone has to do that, but something that is worth considering. The other thing is in terms of actually reaching communities that we're not reaching right now through Facebook or through other social media channels is, I think that PK Earth to try to find a partner, an international partner, who potentially does have these sorts of global context, global networks. And I'm thinking like, okay, like skateboarding governing body, they have probably established connections in different communities. There's overlapped often with our community. I bet that there's a way we could leverage a partnership where they help us conduct communications with their skateboarding community to then by effect reach their parkour community. So I wonder if there is a partnership or a partner out there that can help facilitate creating the communication connection because they've already established those lines of communication to an adjacent community. I think this is a really powerful route that could help, again, address the issue of like, who's not here right now and how do we even get them on board here? So I strongly urge there be some effort into figuring out the right partner or set of partners for that. And again, I think looking at adjacent activity communities like parkour and possibly rock climbing. Where do you often see skill overlap or practice overlap in parkour in your countries? Those are the communities we need to be looking to and reaching into and saying, hey, we're trying to actually get into we love skateboarding, but we actually just want to talk to your parkour people. Can we talk to some of your skateboarders because they can help us get to your parkour people? So I know communications is a lot of work. That's why I think you should have like a committee of people who do this. But yeah, that's my other recommendation, proposal, idea.
My little thought that just came up from the discussion earlier that might mention again is if there was a system to have anyone really, grassroots community members or whoever is interested to be like a community advocate or community, I'm hearing myself. Anyway, I basically register with Parkour Earth as being a community advocate or community spokesperson or community ambassador or something like that, so that we have like regular contacts that we have a discussion with. So whether that's doing sessions like this, where all of those people are invited, or whatever, I think the idea there is just having the same people so that you have a continuing conversation. And those people can come and go over time, obviously, but having a familiar face from all walks of the community, being on almost like, yeah, a little contact list for us to speak to and reach out to, and then trying to target individuals to get onto that. What do people think? Does that make sense? Or
Yep, I'm on board. You're basically like talking about having people essentially act as those advocates or communication mouthpieces to make those connections. I wrote about,
so we've got a little touch point to talk to communities.
Yeah, but they just need to be, but a part of that is obviously there's an operational activity there insofar that you can't just send people out and go do this. You have to give them tools and resources and a structure on how to engage with communities effectively, especially if they're radically culturally different.
Yeah,
How do
for
you
sure.
walk them
And
through
there
the
needs to be a lot of
process?
translation and such like.
Yeah, and even figure out where they are in the process of what they can reasonably do for
Yeah.
their community. You know, there is a lot of cultural sensitivity that needs to be training that needs to happen. So I love it as a premise. I think we should do it, or you should do it. But,
Yeah, and I agree with your point of there needs to be that committee, right? There needs to be people who are from Parkour Earth, have the skills, have maybe like a community outreach committee, who is the Parkour Earth side of that arrangement, and then on the other end of the arrangement is the community spokespeople. Could be a cool little system.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I ask, there's this question of outreach and how to reach the really diverse group in the community. I also have in mind, that's a huge part that needs some focus. In my mind, from across the four discussions, there's also some ambiguity for me about what are the central platforms, or what are the, every organization tends to have, they put news alerts out on their webpage, or they, Parkour organizations usually have a Facebook group that they just use to blast information out. But
like,
there needs to be well, what's the medium? But also, there needs to be this effort in outreach, absolutely. But also, I imagine it can't all be direct face-to-face outreach. And for everyone that's involved in these communities, or these engagements that we've been running, yes, sit probably in a position of privilege of some sort, whether it's privilege of access to the platform, whether it's because you happen to get an individual invite, or you're known. How do folks in that group, folks that are online right now, want to be engaged as well?
Yeah, I think that's something I want to say there, is that if you are talking about lots of different cultures, lots of different communities, there is no medium or way of communicating that's going to fit everyone. So part of talking to all kinds of different people is working out what is their preferred communication method, and bringing your message to them rather than expecting everyone to come together. So that's something that needs to be actively changing and developing with each person that we talk to, and that's why it's useful to have like regular people, like those contact points that you're familiar with, because then you'll be able to build up that relationship over time with them.
Yeah, it's great. And I can see in the chat there's a huge discussion about, there's a litany of different options from obviously Facebook, but Trello, Slack, the Discord servers have started to take off as well.
Because that's the thing, like on my phone, right, I've got that many different messaging apps, but you need to use all of them for friends that only use that app, right? Especially across different countries and cultures. Like, I hate WhatsApp, but you can't go to some places without using WhatsApp because that's what everyone uses.
I just want to say that I think that I don't know who was saying it. I wasn't paying attention. I think it was Ross. But going to, like, we can present a set of tools, but that's not equitable, and that we need to figure out how those communities want to be communicated with. This is, by the way, I recognize this as a challenge. I think a lot of governing bodies in sports say, hey, this is what we're doing and you got to do this. And also acknowledge that, like, governance in general, people in governing positions in a lot of different countries, are positions of privilege who don't necessarily have a connection to the community. But I think that's going back to the idea of partnering up with international organizations who have community connections, who can help us facilitate those connections through channels they've already identified. Like, again, there are organizations who have done the work already that are adjacent to us, that share community membership, that, like, that is a more intelligent approach to trying to figure out what communication practices are being used by communities that we're not currently reaching. That's, you know.
Yeah.
Internet access is a privilege.
It is.
I think also through all that stuff, obviously, like, I think there's no one size fits all in terms of medium or way to contact people and talk to people, because you have that sliding scale between the shallow message, which reaches everyone, versus the face-to-face, I'm talking to you and building up a relationship. And you have to have mediums all across that spectrum that are active, so that you are having the breadth of reach, but you also need the depth of your message. And yeah, so there's a whole world of mediums if you want to talk to the whole world, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point. And we started to build something out in one of our very first discussions about, you know, there's these spectrums of engagement, and we were talking about it in terms of formal versus informal, but the missing axis there is, you know, there's a depth of engagement, there's a place of engagement, which is going to require a different medium. I think there's definitely something that needs to be built out. Emma, you unmuted just before. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to ensure that we're giving them like a non-judgmental place to speak as well, because a lot of those like areas that we're wanting to connect with might not necessarily feel comfortable opening up and talking about, you know, even like terminology they would prefer or how they'd like to be communicated with, and just ensuring that we're not coming in here being like, this is what we want, but giving them that space to actually voice it in the way that they see fit, and making them feel comfortable enough to do that so that we can actually build those relationships with those different communities.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Let me try and grab that as well.
I think the good thing that Parkour Earth has there to its benefit is that it does have access to the entire global community networking wise. Like we're only a step away or 2 steps away from people who can help us to understand these different methods of communication and to understand the needs of different communities. And it might be a few degrees of separation away, but like that's what networking is, right? You chase those trails to find the person that you're wanting to talk to, and that's gonna get on board with you.
Yeah.
Even if we don't have a direct contact somewhere, we've got somebody who does, right?
Can I just also mention something that I don't think we've addressed directly is using representation or diversity of representation as a kind of form of outreach. Just that if in the communications that Parkour Earth
Super quiet, Kel.
Oh, sorry, fuck. Talking about diversity of representation as a form of outreach, basically, if there are diverse voices and faces in the communications that Parkour Earth put out, then that will mean that people who will see themselves or see people that look like themselves and feel more comfortable taking the first step towards the community, towards Parkour Earth. So, like, I bang on about diversity of representation a lot, but I think it can be a really useful tool and without tokenizing people, but you know, social media can help.
And just so I understand, so I can capture that right, Kel, is that around making sure, you know, that diversity of representation or that diversity of engagement is also represented and also sort of, if I understand, it's sort of about making it or trying to make it clear that we are wanting to engage or we are trying to create spaces where that engagement is appropriate, or is that the run?
Yeah, and also signal boosting people who are marginalized, even if it is just sharing videos that are cool. It shows that Parkour Earth has support for people that don't look like straight white boys, and that means people will feel more comfortable approaching the organization, essentially. Again, without stigmatizing the hard part.
Yeah, it's not just about who Parkour Earth is connecting to, but who on behalf of Parkour Earth is actually doing the connection.
Yeah, it's about making sure that Parkour Earth itself looks like and sounds like a whole range of different people. And on top of that, like I think other people have done a good job of talking about kind of classic protected characteristics and diversity, but also in terms of diversity of practice. So that includes things like age and physical ability that will affect the way folk train, but also, like we said before, the kind of very standard now, like school age kids classes versus like the people who are doing, you know, big, huge, epic videos, who are doing, I mean, for me, like the roof gaps thing is a whole other problems, because there's a question there about the kind of stuff you want to encourage and how you can interact with authorities and stuff. But people doing like mad big hops, as well as people doing real cute like young kids classes and older people's classes or whatever. I think it's really important to make sure that it's not just straight passing white boys, but also that you're talking about different kinds of practice, because I think what was quite interesting is that obviously some of the young straight white men in Scotland didn't see the need for representation in the other ways we were talking about, but actually without meaning to, what they were pushing really hard when I was asking people about it was this idea of diversity of practice in parkour, which essentially amounts to the same thing in terms of we're trying to represent and engage with quite a huge range of groups. So just throwing that one in as part of that kind of representation factor is really important to have both. There's obviously the public kind of media representation of parkour is quite homogenous, and it's all the big hops there. And then the kind of more academic side, you know, things like art retreat and coaching conferences, things like that, you have quite a different kind of often separate types of practice or types of thinking around parkour, and bringing those two together, as well as all the kind of characteristic stuff we talked about, would be really, really cool. I don't think there's a body that I could kind of honestly say has done both, which is really what we need, because it's all parkour.
Yeah. I might, unless there's some really burning final bits to add into that where we've just hit time on the workshop. You know, generally we have run over a little bit just so we can explore questions and answers and all that sort of thing. So I'm just going to give 30 seconds to anyone that has a burning input that they want to make anywhere else that's not been captured, and then I'll open it up for questions or anything else. So 30 seconds. Anything else on this topic people want to have in?
I'm gonna hop in real quick, and it's sort of related but not really related, so I can go sleep after this. But
sure.
And it's gonna sound super deaf after the conversation that we just had, but let's talk about the awkward elephant in the room that is money. I think all of us would prefer to like not have to worry about that, period, especially when it comes to parkour. We just want to jump on stuff and have people leave us alone. But bringing, I guess, funds in kind of the right way is probably an important discussion to have at some point. And one of the things that we've kind of kicked around is this idea of like, when we start reaching out to different organizations that have kind of paved the way, we have kind of a creative license to do that in a really unique way, I think. Why is it, for instance, that like only Red Bull is like one of the kind of like main sponsors that people like associate with like parkour at this point? Like, it's an energy drink, it's not exactly super healthy, but we're living in times where like there are, you know, there's a huge wave of popularity towards healthy trends at this point. And there's a lot of money in that at this time. And if we look at reaching out to some of those organizations or ones that we kind of see ourselves in, I guess, essentially, those are some interesting ways to kind of bring in, I guess, additional funding, because at some point we do have to get to the point where if you want to battle an organization like FIG, you do need some funding. Ideally we would continue to only run with volunteers, but that's I guess something to kind of think about for the future. And like I said, we're in this unique aspect where part of parkour culture is really a sound connection between mind and body, and taking care of your body in the first place. That movement is essential for your health. So I think we can use that in some interesting ways to kind of build alternative sources of revenue, cycle things back into this kind of parkour economy that we've talked about, and go from there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we're going to do any of the stuff that we've talked about, or any of the stuff on your storyboard there, like, it needs to be funding behind it. So Parkour's definitely got to work out where all that's coming from, and then you can work out how to get stuff happening. Because, like, Damien has plenty of things to do for free, let alone everyone else. So, and I think that's maybe a bit of a thought there as well, is that volunteering is how a lot of organizations are doing a lot of stuff. But in terms of the people who are involved on the Parkour Earth board, or directly involved with Parkour Earth, they're probably already heavily volunteering at home, heavily volunteering at the national level. And then, there's not much we can really expect of a lot of people when it gets to the trickle over of maybe they can find 20 minutes in the week to work on Parkour Earth projects. Do you know what I mean? And whatever's happening at home is always going to be more pressing because it's the people around you. So Parkour Earth needs to make sense financially, I think.
Okay, I might just pause the discussion there. Well, pause that discussion there, and just really open up broadly and try and provide some space for any questions or anything at all related to anything we've spoken about, or Parkour Earth in general, or anything that you can pepper Damien and the board with. And I'll just zoom in over here. Here's just a collection of different questions that had come up in previous discussions. Actually, don't know if I can get it all on the screen so that it's not tiny, but I'll do a slow scroll. Any questions?
Hi, Adam. Well, I might follow on from what I was just talking about and ask Damien, what is the plan in terms of making Parkour Earth financially viable? Where are you looking to get funds from? And also, where are you mostly looking to have your expenditure?
Sure. The first question we're having at the moment is around...
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Caitlin.
There's a few different discussions happening. So we've had various people approach us and talk to us about crowdfunding. They're saying, we would love to chuck our dollar towards something that Parkour Earth is doing. And so there has been discussion around, what that looks like. And
I remember Eugene's big concern with that was that if you're crowdfunding and something happens, something goes wrong, then you've got to pay everyone back, and then it's a really big hassle if you're doing it worldwide across all of international transfers and stuff.
Yeah. But rather than just having that discussion and then doing nothing about it, we keep having, there's other people coming asking the same kinds of questions. So we're going through that process to see
nice.
When, where, and if.
Bye, Ali.
So, thanks, Ali. Where is it viable? If it is viable, where is it viable, and for what reasons, and what processes, and different things like that.
Awesome.
And so that's one piece of the discussion, because people have talked about that. There's obviously elements to do with. There's 7 main areas of funding that I identify, at least, around grants, sponsorships, services, so basically anything that you sell, essentially being a service. There's memberships.
Yeah, I think I've been reading the same thing lately.
Yeah, there's donations, there's contracts, and etc. So there's a whole bunch of those area spaces. At the moment, we've been targeting the sponsorship space and just drawing on from some of the things that Adam was talking about in terms of healthy spaces and places and trends towards well-being, and Parkour's space within advocating and having well-being discussions and who we can approach in that space. And so at this stage, a lot of what we're doing, and those are the questions, what is Parkour Earth doing and what have you been doing? A lot of it is around policy, and so who do we approach and who do we not approach? Is it okay for Parkour Earth to approach an oil company, for example, if they're happy to support? What are the values that we have? What are we okay with approaching and not approaching? So that's where the conversation is at the moment. And then say for example, on the membership space, we've got, a bunch of organizations who are in a position to pay a membership fee, but we have a bunch of organizations or federations that are not in a position to do that, and then we have ones that don't even exist. And so we don't want that to be a barrier, but it can be a source of revenue. So having to juggle that conversation is an important one for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions?
What is the action process following these engagements?
So Elliot and I might be able to jump on different parts of this conversation, but the plan is for this to run through August as well, with these sessions in other languages, where the survey is continuing to be translated into different languages. So we definitely appreciate people's support in trying to ensure that those that do have the internet can access those surveys in their language and contribute, even if they can't attend a session like this. And then you're looking at these potential for communities to self-facilitate these kinds of conversations within their own community and then feed that information back. And then we'll be continuing to work with Elliot and ThinkPlace around actually collating all of this and turning it into something that we can actually, look at, theming a lot of this stuff. One of the things I've loved is we have had both reinforcement of ideas through the different sessions, but we also gained an incredible amount of depth in terms of different differences of opinion, not necessarily ones that clash, but just richer perspectives and wider perspectives. And so we'll have to take all of that and sit with it and have Elliot's expert help in making sense of the information that's been provided. And yeah, part of that will turn into essentially action plans and operation plans, elements that will impact on the AGM, which is going to be in December. So on things around how we change the constitution to make sure that we're able to actually, according to our constitution, act appropriately. So like with some of the tough stuff we're talking about, diversity at the moment, it's not catered for in the constitution and it needs to be. So making sure that those changes are made, but then also sort of strategic planning and vision stuff, so we can actually clearly articulate this information to the community through our website and channels. Do you want to jump on any more of that, Elliot?
I guess that covers most of it. And I was just going to say, in terms of what you guys as participants can expect is, immediately after this, as the last of this first tranche, immediately after this, the plan is to start that process of bringing things together and start, where those points have been reinforced, pulling them into distinct areas that we want to act in, or that the Parkour Earth wants to act in, sorry. And that's a first layer of synthesis and trying to formalize it into, okay, everyone kept saying this, what does that actually mean in terms of strategy, vision, and activities that flow out of that? There's also some really pragmatic things that have come up. For example, in the last session, there was a big discussion around, actually right now, engagement's just really hard. If you want to get involved with Parkour Earth, I think at the moment it's either comment on a Facebook thing or send an email form through from the website. And there was a really good discussion at the end of the last one around just creating a more flowing channel of engagement might be something that we want to do, that the board might want to do immediately. So there's some things that we can draw out that are immediately actionable, and then some things that, like Damien said, go into that vision and strategy. But all of the content that's being gathered, as I mentioned at the beginning, is also going to be made public for any other contributions and just for transparency's sake as well.
Just to follow up, if that's all right.
Please.
What sort of resources do you guys have currently which are going to essentially allow you to facilitate this synthesis process of bringing everything together and then that preparation for come December? Because I think TJ mentioned earlier, you guys are like PK Earth seems like it sits in a bit of a governance role. So I'm curious in terms of where everyone sits on PK Earth, like what sort of resources do you have to make sure all of this is getting done, I suppose?
That's a good question. So fewer than what we would like, given that, Parkour Earth was formed with the transitional CEO being someone who works full-time for a council, who volunteers as the CEO for a national parkour organization, and then volunteers for an international parkour organization. And then we transitioned to a CEO who has a full-time job, who volunteers for a national parkour organization, who is now volunteering for an international parkour organization. Few, but already through these processes, we're having more and more people saying, oh, I want to help, and this is an area where I have expertise that I would love to give. Through a number of things that people have started talking about, you might receive a virtual knock from us saying, hey, we're interested. One of the things we've just been very careful of so far, and this is across the whole board, is like with national federations, for example, we haven't wanted to solicit membership or force anyone into membership. We think we have a much more viable vision and democratic platform that I think is worth pursuing collectively, but we don't, in that same process, we don't want to then say, so therefore you need to join us. And so we've been very careful in that space. And then in the same zone, we've wanted to be able to start having these conversations and not just go, or Damien's going to start picking people that he knows and just slotting all these people into that space. And so wanted to be careful how we do that, and actually wanted to start this process before we did that on a larger scale, so we could figure out how do we want to do that. Are we wanting to actually have contracts, volunteer contracts and things that people are working towards it, or should it be a little bit more informal? So have access to the board. We have quite high level legal expertise. Our chair, for example, is a partner in a law firm, for example, and our other skills and things, and then also think place in terms of those opportunities for the actual collation of this information and data. But Nina has unmuted, so I will stop talking.
Nina?
Yeah, sorry. Two things that might help with the visualists. See, this works for my work call, so I don't know what's going on with Zoom. Yeah, basically there'll be expertise that hasn't been involved in any of these discussions. So Parkour Earth has a clear idea of the work to do. I think open calls for volunteers across the channels you've tried to do for this would be really good, and asking folk like ourselves not just to take on responsibilities but to share opportunities for volunteering with their local grassroots communities is a way of both getting more people involved, engaging more people, using expertise and sharing the load. So it really, ideally, hopefully, meets a whole bunch of the criteria we spoke about today in terms of what parkour should try to be and try to pursue. And then the other thing as well is not just seeing participation in the next steps of this as a place to use existing capacity, but as a place to build capacity for people who are not experienced in this kind of work. So when you're talking about volunteer roles, you're not necessarily need expertise. Sometimes you just need time. Like, I mean, anyone who's a partner in a law firm has a heap of expertise, but usually doesn't have very much time. So
they pass it on to all their interns.
Yeah, okay, cool. But for example, you know, treating involvement in whatever the next stages are as an opportunity for folk to get involved who don't have any experience, but like love parkour and want to contribute in some way to its longevity and its sustainability in future is a really cool thing that you could do. And yes, that will mean resource on behalf of those probably within Parkour's kind of formal structures to get folks set up and coach them through the things that need to be done. But it also means that you have a wider pool of people in future that you can then draw on their emerging expertise and their emerging experience on these kind of issues. So putting it out not just to folk who've turned up for calls like this. I was kind of disappointed that on a global international engagement event I already knew 2 people, which is unfortunate. I was like, oh, well, it's exciting new parkour people. But so there's folk out there who have not been involved but will have interest and or experience and or capacity to help. I think it'd be really cool to throw it out. And one of the key things we talked about already is keeping the barrier to participation low. So if you're asking for volunteers, don't start with a massive form they've got to fill in that kind of talks about, get them just to send an email, say, hi, I'm interested. This is why I'm interested. Can someone talk to me about how I can get involved? And go from there. And that will capture the people who have formalized experience, but also much more likely to capture people who are just keen and likely have ability, but not expertise or experience. And that'd be a really, really cool, exciting thing for Parkour to be.
That makes me wonder about, you know, there's so many, I'm drawing just from the Australia experience, but there's so many people I used to think about of, oh, wouldn't it be great if XYZ was still involved? Or I would just love to sit down with this former really influential person that's now not involved and have them mentor me or coach me through and help me think through what I'm trying to do. It'd be so cool, you know, as one of those people that's not involved as much as I'd like to be anymore. I'd love to help someone and say, oh, Damien, this upcoming guy wants help. You know, I'll partner with Damien and he'll do the work, but I can help him bounce ideas. Or that'd be really fun. Any other questions or comments before we finish up for the night? Day, morning, wherever you are.
On your little mentorship thing there, been having a bit of a look into an idea my dad brought up recently for where a lot of big corporates, like, they need to have some kind of contribution to the society or whatever, so some kind of philanthropic contribution in order to look good, even though they obviously don't care. But supposedly Commonwealth Bank, for example, has a program of pro bono services, which seems to, like, all of these big corporates seem to have it if you can hunt it down. I think that's proving the elusive bit. But essentially loaning out their employees to non-profits who have the expertise to then come in and either work with you on a project for free or whatever. Basically, they're on the company's time for like a little bit to help you out a little bit every now and then. And what we thought could be a useful way to apply that is essentially to have that expertise come in occasionally to help anyone who wants to volunteer and give them a bit of a reason to be there, because rather than walking in like, I'm keen, but I don't know what to do, they walk in and say, I'm keen, and you say, all right, well, we've got somebody coming in on Thursday who knows their shit. They can help and like mentor you, like you're talking about, Elliot. And then you can do the work bit and you can get stuck in. So I don't know if that's something that is viable. I'm looking into it and I'll let you know. But it could be pretty exciting, getting free access to industry professionals in lots of different areas that are relevant to things that we need to do. Has anyone heard anything about any of those pro bono services from big corporates? Because I've never heard anything about it. But there's all this information online, and then it's just about finding the right person to actually talk to and get it happening.
Yeah, I've used one before from PwC Consulting. They were an expert in HR, and they were involved in that. And a lot of them are members of boards. Those sorts of things. There's a few recruitment websites, I think, in Australia at least around, I'm a professional and I want to volunteer my services to a charity, and you can sort of go on and select them.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to boost, but quick one for you, Damien. For your survey, do you have Arabic already?
No, but it's one of the ones we want to.
Because I'm just thinking back to when I was in Morocco. Some of those guys are real keen, and they fucking love parkour, and they're good at English. So I might try and have a chat with them about Parkour Earth and see if they want to translate it for us.
That'd be wonderful.
And then distribute it. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, I'm going to head off.
Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Ross.
Have fun, Mob. Good to see your faces.
Great. Well, if there's nothing, Mitchell, I know you've been like typing in a bunch of other questions in there. I don't know if you just wanted to drop them in as notes for reference, or if you wanted to ask them directly.
This last one I'm saying is basically, it's linking back to what we're doing with the APA. Like we found at the last AGM, we had a nice intention of transitioning to a governance system similar to what PK Earth I think has in mind. But we found once we got into the flow of things, there's just so much boots on the ground stuff that still needs doing. Like I understand that PK Earth has that governance intention, but I think especially now, since you're in your infancy and you're just basically getting started, now is when the boots on the ground really need to be moving. And I think from our experience with the APA, to get stuff done, like the bigger projects and the stuff that requires expertise, it's really been requiring us setting aside some of our funding to actually pay someone to do it. Because like again, going back to leadership stuff earlier, we only have 12 months, maybe 9 if we're lucky. And getting certain key projects done in a timely manner is quite pivotal. So we have made a few decisions for us in relation to our qualifications program to spend funds to get a fairly speedy outcome. So we had people in the community who had the expertise to be doing these things, but not necessarily the spare time. So what we've done is made some funding available to pay them over a period of time as they're able to complete the project. Look, it's been working for us to a fair amount of success. And I suppose I think it's something PKE should consider going forward. You guys probably have a lot of stuff that needs to be doing, whether it's writing policy or putting together, like, I don't know, you guys probably have a lot going on. But it's probably feasible, or I'm wondering whether you guys can consider putting that funding aside to give someone maybe that time so they can focus on it, rather than saying, oh man, do I go and coach these hours at the gym, or do I sit down and volunteer this time, so they don't have to decide between this money and whether they contribute to the international scene, so to speak.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, Mitch. Okay. Well, if that's sort of the end, then I might just pass back to you, Damien, just to close us out. Any final pieces you wanted to put in, or final requests, and then we'll wrap it up.
Cool. I would have loved to do this before each individual person had to leave, had left. So hopefully they review the rest of the video. But this whole process, and I guess it's a global engagement project, but it's also an experiment, to gauge what is the community's appetite for the project that is Parkour Earth. Because if the community doesn't want it, then we don't need it. We won't work on it. But what we're feeling is that there is the space for something here to build something collectively together that is something that we're all collectively really proud of and buy into and really value. And so as the current custodians of this platform that we're trying to figure out what to do, I think from the board myself, we're just so thankful for everyone's participation, all the the time that you've given to participate in these sessions, and all the input and the ideas. I think I said in one of the other sessions that we don't get any better, we can't make any improvements unless people are giving us critical feedback. So we're really glad of the affirmations that we're getting in terms of, we thank you for how you're doing it and what you've done so far, but also the stuff that is is a lot more challenging in terms of the conversations that we've had, particularly some of the ones tonight, about inclusivity and diversity that we need to have. It's just creates such a bigger, richer picture, greater depth and breadth of information and ideas for us to actually do something with. So I'm just super stoked, and I've had a bit of a roller coaster week, and even though this takes a bit of time, I have been really excited for all of these sessions. So just want to say thank you very much from the Parkour Earth team.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks, everyone. As I mentioned, all this stuff will be sent out at some point. But thanks all for your participation, and we'll be back soon.
Cheers, Elliot. You can pause that recording.